ॐ ब्रह्मानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमूर्तिम् द्वन्द्वतीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमस्यादिलक्ष्यम् एकं नित्यं विमलमचलं सर्वधी साक्षिभूतम् भावातीतं त्रिगुणरहितं सद्गुरुं तं नमामि. Shivoham friends, today we are going to start with the grace of Lord Ram, the book 5 of Yoga Vasishtha Maharamayan, and this book is about on resolution and becoming quiet. This is Upasna Khand basically. The previous section on firm evidence set out the goal of abiding in the Atma. The Upashanti Prakram gives instruction on the ways and means for attaining that goal. The chief obstacle to the self-realization is the false identification of the Atma with the body. This is called Deha Atma Bodh. This false identification is the result of Ahankar or the ego sense. This section gives practical guidance to eliminate one's identification with the ego and describes a number of ways or methods and yogic processes for this purpose. The major ones are inquiry into the true nature of the self, seeing all creation equally as varied manifestations of the one Brahma or God. This is called Samdarshana. Considering oneself as pure consciousness in all conditions of life and at all times, and performing one's allotted duties in life without any attachment. When, as a result of these practices, a person becomes perfectly unattached to the fruits of actions, all attachments, aversions, and fear disappear, and the person becomes qualified for attaining the Samadhi stage. So, today we are going to take the first chapter of this Upasna Khand, Upasna Prakaran, Upashanti Prakaran. Chapter 1, the Midday Ritual. Vasishta said, Ram, now hear me propose to you the subject of quietude or rest, which follows that of existence and sustenance of the universe. This knowledge will lead you to nirvana, that is final extinction. Valmiki ji says, as Vasishtha was delivering his holy words, the assembly of the princes remained as still as the stars in the clear sky of an autumn night. Listening princes, looking with muted gaze at the venerable sage amidst the assembly, resembled the unmoving lotuses looking at the bright sun from their breathless beds. Harem princesses forgot their joy at hearing this sermon of the sage. Their minds became as cool and quiet as in the long absence of their consorts. Ladies fanning with fans in their hands remained as still as a flock of flapping geese resting on a lotus bed, and the jingling of gems and jewels on their arms ceased like the chirping of birds on the trees at night. The princes who heard these doctrines sat reflecting on their hidden meanings, their index fingers to the tips of their nose in thoughtfulness. Others pondered on their deep sense by laying fingers on their lips. Ram's face flushed like the blushing lotus in the morning, and it brightened by casting away its melancholy, as the sun shines by dispelling the darkness of night. King of kings Dashrath felt as delighted hearing the lectures of Vasishtha as a peacock is gladdened by the roar of rain clouds. Sarana, the king's minister, removed his unstable monkey mind from his state affairs and applied it intensely to attend to the teachings of the sage Lakshman, who was well versed in all learnings, shone as a digit of the bright crescent moon with the internal light of Vasish's instructions and the radiance of his spiritual knowledge. Shatrugna, the subduer of his enemies, was so full of delight in his heart at the teachings of the sage that his face glowed with joy like the full moon with all her digits. The other good ministers, whose minds were absorbed in the cares of state affairs, were set at ease by the friendly admonition of the sage. They glowed in their hearts like lotus buds expanded by sunbeams. All other chiefs and sages present in that assembly had the gems of their hearts cleansed of their impurity by Vashish's preaching. Their minds glowed with fervor from his impressive speech. At this instant, the loud sound of conch shells arose, resembling the full swell of the sounding ocean and the deep and deafening roar of summer clouds. The conch sound filled the roof of the sky and announced the time of midday service. The loud uproar of the shells drowned out the sage's feeble voice, just as the high sounding roar of rain clouds put down the notes of the sweet cuckoo. The Muni stopped his breath and stopped speaking because it is vain to speak where it is not heeded or heard. Hearing the midday shout, the sage stopped for a moment. After the noisy confusion was over, he addressed Ram and said, Ram, thus far I have delivered to you my daily lecture for this day. I will resume it next morning and tell you all that I have to say on the subject. It is ordained for the twice born classes to attend to their religious duties at midday. The lecture doesn't require us to swerve from discharging our noonday services at this time. Rise therefore, O fortunate Ram, and perform your sacred ablutions and divine services with which you are well acquainted, and give your alms and charities also as they are ordained by law. Saying so, the sage rose from his seat with the king and his courtiers. He resembled the sun or moon rising from the eastern mountain with their retinue of stars. Their rising made the whole assembly rise after them, like a gentle breeze moving a bed of lotuses with the black eyes of black bees sitting upon them. The assembled princes rose up with their crowned heads and marched with their long and massive arms like a body of big elephants from the Vindhya hills with their clumsy legs. As they pushed up and down in their hurry, the jewels on their bodies rubbed against each other and displayed with a blaze like that of reddened clouds at the setting sun. The jingling of gems on crowns resembled the human bees, and flashing reflections from crowns spread various colors of the rainbow around. The beauties in the court hall resembled tender vines and holding fans like clusters of blossoms in their leaf-like palms, formed a forest of beauties about the elephantine forms of the brave princes. The hall reflected the glints of blazing bracelets and looked as if it was strewn with the dust of mandara flowers blown away by the winds. There were crystal tanks of pure water mixed with ice and powdered camphor. The landscape around was whitened by kush grass and the flowers of autumn. Gems hanging from princes' headdresses cast a reddish color over the hollow dome of the hall, making it appear like the evening twilight that precedes the shades of night, which puts an end to the daily works of man. The fair faces of fairy ladies were like lotuses floating on the watery luster of the strings of pearls hanging upon them. They resemble they resemble lines of bees fluttering about lotuses. The anklets at their feet emitted a ringing sound like the humming of bees. The large assemblage of people, of princes, arose amid the assembled crowds of men and presented a scene never seen before by the admiring people. The rulers of the earth bowed down lowly before their sovereign and departed from his presence and the royal palace in large bodies, like waves of the sea, glistening like rainbows by the light of their shining ornaments. The chief minister Sumantra and others who were best acquainted with royal etiquette prostrated themselves before their king and the holy sages, then took their way towards the holy stream to perform their sacred ablutions. The rishis Vamdev, Vishwamitra, and others stood in the presence of Vasishtha and waited for his leave to make their departure. King Dashrath honored the sages one by one and then left them to attend to his own business. Citizens returned to the city and foresters retired to their forests. The aerial beings flew in the air and all went to their respective homes in anticipation of rejoining the assembly the next morning. The venerable Vishwamitra, being invited by the king and Vasishtha, stayed and passed the night at Vasishtha's home. Vasishtha was honored by all the princes, sages, and great Brahmins, and adored by Ram and other princes of King Dashrath's royal family. Then Vasishtha proceeded to his hermitage with the obeisance of the assembled crowd on all sides, and followed by a large retinue, just as the god Brahma is accompanied by bodies of celestials. He that gave leave to Ram and his brother princes and to all his companions and followers to return to their homes from his hermitage in the woods. He bade farewell to the aerial, earthly, and underground beings that kept him company with their formal praise of his merits. Then, entering his house, he performed his Brahmin rites with a dutiful disposition. This much was there in the chapter first. And in the chapter second, that night, Ram ponders Vashish's lectures. Valmiki ji continued relating to the story of Bhardwaj, saying, after the moon bright princes returned to their residence, they performed their daily services according to the daily ritual. Vasishtha and other saints, sages, and Brahmins, even the king and princes, were all engaged in their holy services at their own houses. They bathed in sacred streams and fountains filled with floating lotuses and other aquatic plants, their edges frequented by reddish geese, cranes, and storks. After they had performed their ablutions, they made donations of lands, cattle, seeds, and beddings, sesame grains, gold and gems, and food and clothing to the holy Brahmins. Then, in their own houses, they worshipped the gods Vishnu and Shiva in their temples and made offerings to the sun and the rulers of the skies with offerings of gold and gems that are sacred to the particular gods and planets. After their offerings were over, they joined with their sons and grandsons, friends and relatives, and their guests also in partaking of their lawful food. Shortly after this, daylight faded away at the eighth watch of the day, and the charming city scene began to disappear from sight. People employed themselves with their proper duties at the end of the day and took to their evening service with the failing beams of the setting sun. They recited their evening hymn, repeated their jap mantra, and uttered their prayer for the forgiveness of sins. They read aloud their hymns and sang their evening song, praise. Then rose the shade of night to allay the sorrow of lovelorn ladies, as the moon arose from the milky ocean of the east to cool the heat of the setting sun. Then the princes of Raghu's race reclined on their downy and flowery beds, sprinkled with handfuls of camphor powder and appearing like a sheet of spreading moonlight. The eyes of all men were folded in sleep, and they passed the long night as if it were only a short interval. But Ram kept awake in his bed, meditating on all things he had heard from the sage. He continued to reflect on Vashishtha's lectures, which appeared as charming to him like the cry of a parent elephant brings joy to its tender young. Ram's thoughts: what does this wandering of ours in this world mean? Why are all these men and other animals bound to make their entrances and exits in this fleeting theatre? What is the form of our mind and how is it to be governed? What is this illusion of the world? From where did it rise and how is it to be avoided? What is the good or evil of getting rid of this illusion? And how does it cover and overpower the soul? Can it be made to live by any means in our power? What did the Muni say with regard to the means and effect of curbing the desires of the mind? What did he say regarding restraining of our organs? And what about the tranquility of the soul? Our hearts and minds, our living souls, and their delusion tend to stretch out the phenomenal world before us. Our own souls make a reality of unreal existence. All these things are linked together in our minds and are weakened only by the weakening of our mental desires. But how are these to be avoided in order to get rid of our mystery? The slender light of reason is overshadowed, like a single crane in the air, by the dark cloud of passions and desires. Then how am I to distinguish right from wrong? Like a goose separates milk from water. It is a it is as hard to shun our desires, and it is impossible to avoid our troubles here without the utter annihilation of our desire. Here is difficulty in either of the two ways. On the one hand, the mind leads us to spiritual knowledge. On the other, the mind seduces us to worldliness. We know not which way to be led by it. The difficulty is as great as a man climbing a mountain or a child escaping from his fear of a yaksh spirit. All worldly turmoils ends upon attainment of true joy, just as the anxieties of a maiden are over after she has obtained a husband. When will my anxieties become still? And when will my cares come to an end? When will my soul have its holiness and my mind find its rest from acts of merit and demerit? When shall I rest in that state of bliss which is as cooling and complete in itself as the full moon with all her digits? When shall I wander about the earth at large, free from worldly cares and ties? When will my fancy stop from its flight and concentrate on the inner soul? When will my mind be absorbed in the Supreme Soul, like a turbulent wave existing in the breast of the quiet sea? When shall I get over this wide ocean of the world, which is disturbed by the turbulent waves of our desires and is full of the hungry crocodiles of our greedy greed. When will I rid myself of this feverish passion? When shall I rest in that state of complete unemotional stillness of mind, which is the goal of those who seek liberation and of the all tolerant and indifferent philosopher? Ah, when will this continuous fever of my worldliness decrease? It has irritated my whole body by its inward heat and has deranged my humors out of their order. When will this heart of mine cease to throb from its cares, like the light of a lamp ceasing to flutter without wind? When will my understanding gain its light after dispersing the gloom of my ignorance? When will these organs and body parts gain their respite from their constant functions? When will this parched frame of mine get over the sea of greed like a Garud crossing ocean with ease? When will the light of reason, like the clear atmosphere of the autumn sky, dispel this dark cloud of my ignorance that envelops my heavenly essence under the veil of this sorry and miserable form? Our minds are filled with the weeds of Mandara plants, of Nandan, pleasure garden of paradise, but my soul yearns for its restitution in the Supreme Spirit. The dispassionate man is said to be set in the pure light of reason. Therefore, I long to attain that passionless state of my mind. But my restless mind has made me a prey to the python snake of grief, and I cry out in my sorrow, O my father and mother, help me to get out of this difficulty. I also exclaim, O my sister understanding, consent to comply with the request of your poor brother, and consider well the words of the wise sage for our deliverance from misery. I also call you to my aid, O my good sense, and beg of you, O progeny of your virtuous mother, to remain firm by my side as I struggle to break the bonds of the world. Let me first reflect on what the sage said about renunciation, then on the conduct of one who longs for his liberation, and next about the creation of the world. Afterwards, let me remember all that he said on the existence of the universe, together with his beautiful illustrations, all of which are filled with sound wisdom and deep philosophy. Although a lesson may be repeated 100 times over, it proves to be of no effect unless it is considered with good understanding and the right sense of its meaning. Otherwise, it is like the empty sound of autumn clouds without a drop of rain. With this, the chapter second of Upasna Khand also comes to an end, and I will rest today's session here itself. This is completed with grace of Lord Ram, and I pray to Lord Ram again keep his grace on us so that we can keep on moving with this reading session of Yoga Vasishtha Maharamayan. We have reached now to the fifth book, Upasna Khand. Shivoham, friends. We'll meet again tomorrow with the grace of Lord Ram.